It's good to be back home. Veritas, truth. How many of you can remember what it was like to be in your mother's womb? As a young boy on the 23rd of January 1977, my grandfather had a moment with God. And his moment with God said that a priest had been born into the home. At the age of 14, my mother told me the story. And you can imagine at the age of 14 what that sounds like. The last thing that anybody wants to do is to be a priest. At least for me it was. And the thoughts that went through my mind were of my grandfather and his Land Rover in rural Zimbabwe with a white collar and a black shirt, would move from church to church preaching the good news. And somehow I wasn't sure that that was me. As I grew up, I realized that as a young African, our world has multiple realities. But I began to ask myself, what is it about Africa that doesn't seem to leave me, that constantly tugs at my heart, that makes me want to ask questions, seek answers about who I am? Some of the answers I did get, some of them I didn't. But what was insightful was what we are not. And that's why I asked the question again, how many of you can remember what it was like in your mother's womb? You see, the story of Africa is one that kind of looks pretty much like that. A continent that's divided along lines that have come to determine who I am and who you are. A continent that tells us there's us and there's them. But this is not new to you. The story of Africa has been told over and over and over and over again. But I ask the question, how many of you can actually remember what it was like in your mother's womb? Because you see, the story of Africa is a story of untold realities. It's a story of unseen and untapped knowledge, a depth of wisdom, that when we think about who we are, a number of things become clear. If not anything, at least we know who we are not. This is a narrative that has been told over and over and over and over again. And the pride of our lives tells us, especially if you're like me in the world of public policy or government, we've got to solve the problem of poverty. We wake up every day and we create policies, we elect leaders into office, we eradicate, or we seemingly want to eradicate, and we talk about Millennium Development Goals, we shift them to Sustainable Development Goals, and the cycle continues. And the question I ask myself is, when will we come off the track of development? Because, ladies and gentlemen, again, I ask you, please consider what it was like in your mother's womb. Because as you lay there, month after month, day after day, there was a reality that was forming in your mother's womb. There was knowledge that was rich, that I dare say, if I asked any of you here to remember, chances are we probably would fail. And so the question is, did we or did we not exist? And ladies and gentlemen, today, I present to you Africa's coming together. But for Africa to come together, there are a number of things that we need to debunk. You see, Africa wasn't always a set of countries. Africa wasn't always chasing after economic indicators. Indeed, I would even dare say, the audacity that Africa would believe that it would chase what we call human development indicators is laughable. For one simple reason. Africa has always been a continent that's been proud to say that we turn to God for leadership. And indeed we do. For out of Africa, we have seen in history the refuge of men and women, the great moves that have come out. But surely, ladies and gentlemen, when the Human Development Index tells us to chase life expectancy, literacy, and income as the determinant of development, I dare say we need to think again. And ladies and gentlemen, for that to happen, there are a number of things that we must then ask ourselves, that if we are indeed Africa, and that Africa indeed has been birthed out of its womb with a knowledge that is as rich as we know we are, then who are we? And what must we become in order for us to unpack the greatness of who we truly are? Because we surely cannot be chasing development in the 21st century. I dare say what we should be pursuing is dignity. It's arrogant for us to be a community that says we turn to God to lead. And I clarify, I say God, not religion. Because in our turning to God, we recognize that it is Him who chooses the day we are born and the day we die. So ladies and gentlemen, it is a fallacy for those of us who can think that we can actually determine the day we start and the day we end. That if indeed we are literate, then there's a reality that we should be able to understand in the books that we've read and the teachings that we have. And the reality is this, that we know for those who've gone before us, they weren't literate, but yet the very faith that they professed was able to understand one simple thing. They, as those who came before us, irrespective of what faith you professed, declared one thing, that they did walk with God. And so my simple case this morning is, so where is our dwelling place as Africa? And my presentation to you is that Africa is a city. A network of cities that I present to you I call the Kaya. Now the Kaya conjures different images depending on which part of the continent you come from. If you come from this part of the world, it conjures the image of a spiritual reality that is tied to the Mijikenda. If you come from the southern part of Africa, it conjures an image of a house, a dwelling place amongst the Zulu. My proposal to you today is that you consider the Kaya as a city, the dwelling place of all of us. And for us who are here in Mombasa today, Mombasa is our Kaya. Many of us have thought of ourselves as Kenyans. And indeed, the spirit of nationhood has inspired great heights. But when I speak to people, I hardly hear people say, I'm traveling to the United Arab Emirates. What I hear people say is, I'm going to Dubai. When I'm with my colleagues in the UK, they say I'm traveling to Mombasa. I'm going to the Masai Mara. Kenya is just a construct. And because we know that we are literate, we actually know that 200 years ago, what we call Kenya today didn't actually exist. So who are we? And that's my case to you today, that who we are is a collection of cities that I call the Kaya. And so if Africa is going to find its place, a number of things must come together in the city. The first thing is knowledge, tacit knowledge. Knowledge is perhaps one of those things that remains untapped and undefined and almost abstract. But for Africa to come together, one thing that Africa must be bold about is to actually believe that there is yet a world that is unseen, that is untapped for us to manifest. The lights that shine before me as I speak today were created by a man that was able to understand one simple thing. This thing that I'm seeing in my mind's eye, I've never seen before. My proposal to you is, think about it again. Can you remember what it was like when you were in your mother's womb? Can you think of the things that, as you lay there, that remained unseen? As you sit here, considering the things that you've believed are true, that are yet to be manifest, what it is that you're doing with that knowledge? Or are you going to allow yourselves to be limited by decisions that are only based on that which is seen? That is our Africa. But it's not enough just to have access to unseen realities and press in and hope that those things can manifest. It's also important that what we're able to do is we're actually able to make decisions with the knowledge that we have. Who watches over the dreams of the young Africans that have spoken so eloquently in the various pieces of the puzzle that have been tonight? Thoughts, provocation, ideas, concepts that perhaps have been spoken here the third time around as we experience TEDx Aga Khan. Who's watching over those realities to create the environment and ensure that the watchtower has a watchman to look over? That is the second aspect of our city. But it's not enough just for us to have watchtowers. There must be a wall. The defense of who we are. Our ability to know that at the wall we look out and look in. To determine what it is that we need to keep out and what it is that we need to keep in. Africa's most and greatest resource are us, its people. But without a wall, the ability to protect becomes threatened. Not protect so that we may isolate, but protect so that we may negotiate. And that we may negotiate from a place of strength, and that we may negotiate outcomes. That is a part of our African city. But what's a city without a gate? What's our country without Mombasa? Because the gate is where the gatekeepers sit. And they determine who comes in and who goes out. And the African cities of this world have opened their gates to everything and everyone. But the one thing that hasn't happened is we haven't let what we are come out and flow to the rest of the world. But what Africa will do in coming together, what Africa will do in standing out, is that Africa will have to look inside of herself, will have to understand that there is a reality that has never been seen before, that there are realities that people have come from all over the world to find safety in Africa, and they've gone out to explore from Africa. That's who we are. That's how the pieces of the puzzle come together. And so Africa is looking for its kings and queens, its priests and gatekeepers, for the reality of its next century. And I dare say, I'm looking at them tonight. Mombasa presents itself with the next frontier. Mombasa presents itself with a bright vision as we walk towards the year 2035. The reality of each and every one of us is tied and locked within us, but it's time for it to come out. It's time for us to speak boldly. It's time for us to stand among the Commonwealth of Nations and unpack that which is within us. Because that which we are is that which will be called Mombasa. But to do that, there will have to be a regeneration. And a regeneration of our reality so that the world can actually come to us. And as we begin the year 2019, I present to you Mombasa Vision 2035. The ocean city of Mombasa's journey into the 21st century. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa is waiting for its cities. Its cities are made up of you and me. Africa is waiting for us to understand the one simple truth, that there will always be an unseen reality that only we as Africans can actually tell our own story. Thank you very much.